I'm Kern Trembath, founder and owner of Helio Roast Coffee. We roast on Treasure Island in the Oakland-San Francisco Bay. Today I want to say a few words about what's usually called Turkish coffee. And right off the bat, I want to say that this is either a wrong name for the coffee or at the very least a misnomer. Here's what I mean. If you've seen our other video on espresso coffee, you'll recall that we started off by saying that the name espresso refers to a process rather than to a particular cultivar or roast level or grind level. Whether you drink your coffee extremely light on the one hand or almost ready to ignite on the other, if it's made by the espresso process, it's espresso, period, end of story. So too with Turkish coffee, with a major adjustment. The word Turkish refers to both a grind level and a process. If you take an average coffee bean and grind it through an average coffee grinder in order to brew an average cup of coffee, the grinder will shatter that bean into about 400 particles. If you grind that same bean for espresso, you'll end up with around 3,000 solid particles. This is the specific reason why espresso requires pressure, because you can only imagine how clogged your paper filter would get by coffee particles that are 10 times smaller than the ones that you normally run through it. Without pressure, the water couldn't flow through the grounds and it would just sit there. If you grind that same bean for Turkish, it will be pulverized into around 45,000 particles, each of them about 10 times smaller than the espresso particles, which are in round numbers 10 times smaller than the brew. It turns out that I've helped to raise 3 children, and believe me when I say that these particles are so fine that aside from the color, they're pretty much on a par with baby powder. As we've said several times in these videos, the overall way to make coffee is to extract and ingest the flavors inside a coffee bean. The finer you grind that bean, the more likely it is that you will extract all, or at least nearly all, of its flavors. So now we have this coffee powder, or what I earlier referred to as the ground level called Turkish. What do we do with it? How do you extract flavor from this powder in order to make drinkable and excellent coffee? Well, as I said before, you can't just dump them into a filter and run hot water through them into a mug. It would clog up so fast even the plumber couldn't clean it up. What you do instead is to wash or agitate the powder in hot water. And the reason I use energetic words like wash and agitate is that the Turkish grounds are so tiny, it takes them almost no time at all to become saturated, which means heavy, which means they'll want to sink. And if you let them sink, then the ones that sink last will tend to settle on top of the ones that settled earlier, and it'll strangle them so that less water can saturate those lower ones, and hence fewer flavors can be extracted from them. So however you do it, if you keep the entire solution moving, they will all extract at about the same rate, and if you keep it moving long enough, then they will fully extract. You've probably seen, or maybe even used, the instrument used to make traditional Turkish coffee. It's called an ibrik. Here's one here, you can see inside. And the way it works is you put some water into it and over a heat source. When the water starts to boil, you drop in the right amount of Turkish grounds. In a few minutes, I'll tell you what that is. The water continues to boil, of course, which agitates the grounds, which means they continue to move and they continue to saturate and extract. When they are agitated to the point when you want to drink it, that's when you take the ibrik off the heat source and allow the grounds to begin to settle. When enough have settled, then the coffee is slowly poured off and into a small cup. Could be a double-walled Cruve EQ cup on the one hand, or it could be a more traditional Turkish coffee cup on the other. It's very strong, much stronger than espresso, for instance, and depending on how long you let it settle before drinking it, it might have a much heavier body even than espresso because so many more solids remain in it. I use a pretty standard ratio of grounds to water, 1 gram of Turkish coffee per 9 grams or milliliters of water. So that if you want to end up with, say, 50 milliliters of coffee, then use between 6 and 7 grams of coffee, and it will be fabulous. Turkish coffee isn't for everyone. If you tend to think that French roasted brewed coffee is too strong, or that light roasted brewed coffees are, then you probably won't like the same coffees as espressos. And if you don't like them as espressos, you definitely won't like them as Turkish. But if you like exploring the full depths and ranges of flavors available in roasted coffee beans, espresso is a great way to encounter and enjoy them. And Turkish can be even better. Maybe not 100 times better, but a lot. By the way, I am fully aware that for both historical and political reasons, many regions of the world no longer use the word Turkish to describe this process. Instead, they might call it Armenian coffee, or Greek coffee, or Bosnian coffee, or whatever. I am not insensitive to these issues, but I use the word Turkish because in the United States, at least, this is a name that most people are familiar with. Okay, it's time to fill this cup and enjoy it. And now here we are. Every morning when I get up, I have a dilemma. Do I make espresso or Turkish? It's a great dilemma. It's also a great way to start the morning. I hope yours go just as well.